Hey alumni, welcome to InterVarsity World Changers, the podcast celebrating God's world-changing work in and through InterVarsity alumni just like you. I'm your host, John Steele, and today we're talking with Grammy Award-winning musician Maryanne J. George, an alumna from both St. John's University and CUNY York College. As many of you may imagine, MJ is changing the world through music. Whether through her solo album, Not Just Stories, or during her time as a vocalist with Grammy-winning worship band Maverick City Music, MJ's ministry has encouraged millions of listeners in their walk with Jesus. Thanks for tuning in, and enjoy MJ's story. Maryanne J. George, welcome to the InterVarsity World Changers podcast.
It's so good to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. I had to put your full name in there at least just one time because the times you come across somebody with a full name and middle initial that just sounds so legit together, you can't help but throw it out there.
Oh my gosh, yeah, it's funny because nobody really. I mean, that is my official name and what I go by professionally, but it's everybody who knows me calls me MJ. So feel free to call me MJ too.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, well, it's up to you.
Appreciate
whatever
that.
You want.
I appreciate that very much. Thank you. I would be happy to do that. And MJ, I'm really excited to get to hear stories of how God's inviting you to change the world with him today. Now, I know how I would introduce you, and I would probably lean in the direction of deeds done, the work that you do. But Maryanne, you are so much more than the work that you do. So I would appreciate it if you would just take the reins and give an introduction. What's helpful for me and listeners to know about who you are and not just what you do, Maryanne.
Wow, that's okay. I've never had anyone ask me to intro myself. Okay, well, I am first and foremost, I am a daughter, I am a mother, I'm a wife, but I also am a singer-songwriter, I'm a musician, I'm a child of God. That's actually probably the first and foremost thing, but I truly am someone that just loves Jesus, and I'm a very emotional person, so okay. I feel very deeply. I'm a self-proclaimed empath. I am a therapist on the side. I mean, I don't do it I'm not practicing anymore, but I love mental health. I'm really passionate about mental health, and I'm passionate about music, and I kind of intersect both worlds with my life. And it's been a really cool journey to kind of see how God's used me in both of those sectors. And but yeah, that's kind of just a little bit about me. I love pizza, but I can't eat it because I have really bad acid reflux. And
oh no,
yeah, it's terrible. I had to give it up. It was like I had to lay it down. I give you my love for pizza.
Lay down your idols.
Literally lay down. I love coffee. I love Indian tea. That's masala chai is my favorite. Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think. It's kind of I love Andy's Thin Mints.
Oh, hey, there we go. There we go.
Andy's chocolates are so good.
Absolutely.
Good.
Absolutely, and they're used so infrequently that the times that you make it out to Olive Garden and they lay those mints down, you're like, oh,
and you're just
my goodness,
this is so good every time. Every time it's
Absolutely.
Wow, has this always been this good?
Right.
Yeah. But
wow.
I love my Nespresso machine. That's the last thing I could think of now. So, I mean,
that's awesome.
That's a little bit about me.
I love it. That's super helpful. So helpful to get a feel for you, MJ, and who you are, the things that you enjoy, and to see some commonalities. I would also consider myself a pizza lover. I have not yet laid it down, though I probably should. I probably should lay that down.
We'll be praying for your deliverance. We'll be praying.
I appreciate that. Thank you. If you could send it out in your next update or however it is that you keep your prayer warriors in tune, I would appreciate it.
I will.
Yes. Well, okay. MJ, one other question that I have by way of introduction here before we step in any further, and that's if you were not doing the style of music that you do now, if you weren't leaning into, worship music and the things that we really know you for, MJ, what would it be? If not that music, what would you be? What music would you do?
Okay. I was about to ask, are we talking music or are we doing anything?
Music, of course.
I think I think I'm kind of leaning into that for some of the work I'm doing now.
Awesome.
But
Okay.
I'm leaning into more of singer-songwriter, R&B, indie
Oh,
pop.
nice.
Yeah.
Okay.
Soul, a lot of soul. Yeah.
Very
So
cool.
yeah, it's a kind of mix. I don't really like to define myself in a genre, which is
Sure.
really problematic if we're talking about industry. But in terms of artistry, I don't really love to like put myself in a box. So yeah, but I'm kind of all over the place. More like indie pop, R&B, gospel still is always going to be there. I used to sing
Sure.
vocal jazz growing up, so jazz is
Nice.
a big part of my like musical influences. But something that kind of ties in all of that is my genre.
Yes.
That's
Nice.
me.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Defining genres and cutting across labels. And, we live in a world where, you can independently produce your own music to such a like quality degree that you don't even really need to define yourself like that anymore. I would think that can be fairly helpful. So as we've established, mother, wife, child of God, pizza lover, Andy's mint lover, so many things, things that can help define who you are. But one of the other things that you are, one of the things that I'm excited to talk to you about is that you're an InterVarsity alumna, that you have history with InterVarsity, which is so cool. So could you give us just like a brief origin story? How was it that you came to meet InterVarsity in the first place?
Well, wow. Okay, so I grew up in a Christian home, so I always knew that I would be involved in some sort of ministry on campus. And so I originally started off my collegiate, my whole college education in St. John's University in Queens. And so I started to be involved in their university and loved it. And I wasn't on any sort of leadership position. I was just kind of attending as a member. But then I actually left St. John's 1 year after my freshman year, and I transferred to CUNY York College, which was honestly not far from St. John's, but did not have, to my knowledge, did not have an InterVarsity on campus. I think they had other things, but they weren't, it wasn't InterVarsity. Even the other clubs that they had, I had tried so hard to access these clubs and they were just so inaccessible. I didn't know how to reach them. And I think it also like is an indication of how the campus is in general. It's just a very commuter heavy school. People are kind of just coming to go to class and then leave, to go home. So there wasn't this like presence on campus that, encouraged a lot of clubs or, going to things like that. So I just never found the club. So I would go back. I lived in Long Island. And so I would drive back to Long Island and I would attend Adelphi's InterVarsity because it was near my house, my parents' house, and I was living there. So I attended their InterVarsity like as not even as a member. I just kind of dropped in whenever they would have it. And I had a lot of friends that went to Adelphi, so I was kind of like involved there, but kind of had this desire to start an InterVarsity in my school. And I think I waited quite a bit of time to build the courage to do it. But towards the last year of school, I was at York for 5 years. So the fifth year, I think right before the fifth year started, I went to a big event and I got in touch with Jason and Sophia Gabry. And I remember, I think Sophia was the regional director at the time. I can't even remember for New York, New Jersey. But I told her that, I had this desire to like start this InterVarsity, and I'd been going to like all the other InterVarsities and not my own because there was none. And so she told me that there was an InterVarsity that actually used to be at York, and I think they lost touch with the bigger group. And so I kind of like helped her jumpstart a new one. And we went to Big Event with 2 people, and we kind of believed in faith that by, I don't think it's even called Big Event anymore, but it's something else now. But then I went to Basilea that following year that we started the InterVarsity right at the beginning of Big Event. And we only had 2 people come to Big Event, and we prayed. We took a photo of us like two people standing on two ends, and we were like, we're going to fill this up by the time we come to Posse. And then, I went to Basileia in June or May, and we had like a big amount of people who showed up. Like, I can't even remember right now. I think I want to say like 10 people came, which 10 to 11 people committed to come to this thing was a big deal at the time.
Absolutely.
For me, at least it was. And I was like, wow.
Absolutely.
So we got into that, and it was amazing. It was really, really amazing. So I really learned so much of my faith. I was built in that time of starting that InterVarsity in 2015. And so just really grateful for the journey and the lessons I had learned along the way. It's hard to believe that I'm like 8 years from there. Like, that's so wild to me. That's like, wow.
Yep. Oh man.
But that was 8 years ago, almost 9 now. But yeah, it's just amazing to see the journey that God has taken us, and, the way that, out of that experience, I had a desire to pursue my master's in counseling just from just being a part of that. Cause I started off as a vice president. And then because I was transitioning out and I was graduating, I didn't really become president. Otherwise I would have. But I tried to get get an underclassman to
totally
to take on the leadership roles so that the transition would be a lot smoother. It was amazing though. Some really beautiful moments, some great friendships that I'll never forget. So yeah, that was a very long answer to your question.
That's awesome. I love hearing that. And, kind of combining these ideas of this is how it all started and this is kind of where it went. And this is some of the impact that it started to have. That I don't know if you were a self-starter kind of person to begin with, or if it was something that like, man, this has just sort of been discipled into me of like, this is really good. And this would be great for our campus to have this again and to step into leading the way of let's get this reaffiliated and establish a chapter. And let's see more people come to the next event that we do and to see that grow. And how exciting to get to be a part of that.
I was just super challenged because, if you know anything about your college, the demographic of the school is like, they have a very large Islamic population. And I remember just going up to one of my classes, and one whole side of the school was literally dedicated to prayer for like Islamic prayer. And so kids would leave our classes. So these people would do this. And I'm just like, dang, like that is honestly so commendable to see how committed they are to their faith. And I was just like, where the heck is the Christian club here? I was honestly so challenged. I was watching them and I was just like, wow, I'm so challenged in my faith. I want to be able to because you could hear the way that, if anybody has been there, the way the school is organized or arranged is like each floor is like open. So like you could technically hear the prayers on the 4th floor from like the lobby of the school, which is so crazy to me.
What an experience. I was just like, wow.
It was such an experience. And I felt like I remember feeling like God putting this on my heart to start this thing. And, I just remember being like, I want to one day sing worship songs and the entire school hear it, from an InterVarsity standpoint. And just so that at least his word is being spread, his song, his praises, his worship, the worship that we give would be audibly felt and heard in every place in the campus. And so that was my desire. And I really feel like God honored it because I got to go back and do that. And I got to lead, and they had an event in one of the floors that was out in it was open. And so it was just, you could hear it throughout the entire campus. And so it was really amazing.
That's so cool, man. What a legacy to get to be a part of. That's a fantastic story. And I mean, it just really leads so nicely into what we're talking about. Maryanne, as students with InterVarsity, we talk all the time, or we when we were students with InterVarsity, we would talk all of the time about seeing lives transformed, campuses renewed, world changers developed. And here we're leaning into that idea of world changers developed. And what does it mean for an alum like you to be a world changer? So as we think about that here, there's two big things that we talk about. One is a formative experience with InterVarsity. Now, you can be a world changer without ever knowing InterVarsity, obviously. But to be an InterVarsity world changer, we say that a formative experience with InterVarsity, pretty important. But then somebody who is growing in these four loves, in love for God, in love for his word, in love for his people of every ethnicity and culture, and in love with his purposes in the world. And so no surprise here, and you've already touched on this a little bit, that we're going to chat about that experience in the world of music and worship and just some of these big picture things. And I have to imagine, MJ, that you've done a number of conversations like this. You've gotten to talk about sort of the public side of your worship and music career. You've gotten to tell the story of being discovered on YouTube and going to a writing camp that turned into, being a part of Maverick City Music for a while. You've talked about releasing your own music up to this point, that there will be more of that coming, which is really exciting. You've gotten to talk about what it's like to be a worship leader with a large following and staying grounded. Like, I imagine that those are all conversations that you've had in one way or another. Some of those things might come up as we talk together, but I'm really not wanting to lean into any of those things specifically. I'd like to use the frame of world change. And so big picture, I'd like to know, how is God using the worship scene that you've gotten to be a part of, using music as you are engaging with music in all of these different capacities? How is God using music and worship to transform and change his world?
Oh man, I mean, I think he's been using music since the beginning of time. Music is one of the most powerful ways that people encounter the Lord. It was the way that I encountered the Lord, and I've seen people's lives literally change after listening to a song. So I definitely feel like that music is already in and of itself, Christian or not, whether it's glorifying the Lord or not, it has the potential and the ability to change the human condition. I'm a big believer in that. But now infuse it with something as powerful as Jesus, we really have the ability to change the world at that point. I have seen how just Maverick City has taken the world by storm. It was a group that I started off in. And initially, I remember my first exposure. One of the things that makes Mav City so amazing, first of all, is just its diversity, right? So off the bat, one of the things you could tell from the earlier days of Mav is just there were people from different colors, different places, different cultures. I mean, I'm a South Indian. I had never seen another South Indian in that kind of setting. And so, and I had grown up, and this is where InterVarsity was so mind blowing to me, because I grew up in a predominantly Indian church. So I didn't really have Christian friends that I was looking at that didn't look like me. They all pretty much looked like me. And all of my Christian community were Indians like myself. And so my first real exposure to other Christians in deep fellowship, was InterVarsity. Truthfully, it was my first time being exposed, which is crazy to say, because I feel so much of my formative years, had already happened. And I went to college, and now I'm just wow, I knew obviously that there were Christians who didn't look like me, but actually living alongside them, living life with them, getting to see how their faith intersects with their culture and their upbringing. I'd never really seen that outside of what I've known. And so InterVarsity was my first exposure to that. And I felt foolish. I kind of felt naive at that age, 18, 19, 20, to not have really had that kind of understanding of how faith played a role in my world, not just my world, but the world. And so I had that going into Mav, and then, Mav, I get into Mav, and I'm getting an even deeper picture of the church, because that was being a part of InterVarsity was my first real exposure to the capital C church, what the real church looks like. Doesn't look like just me, but all different colors, different races, different communities of people. And then I go into Mav on a much larger scale and get to see that in a more concentrated way as worshipers and leaders and musicians and, people in that way. But just seeing how their cultures and their races and their upbringings really played a role in the way that they lead. and just the way that has impacted and taken the world by storm. People look at Mav and they see themselves. And I think that's why it was so impactful. You know, people look at me and they see another brown girl, like another girl that looks like them that's doing it and understands what they've been through. People look at someone like Aaron Moses, who's Hispanic, and sees his like journey and his process and culturally how he's tied his faith into his, upbringing. They see that. So it's just like different people in the group that, people saw that and really held on to that. And I feel like that was a big part in people changing their own communities. And we know, you don't just become a world changer overnight. It starts small. It starts in your small, it starts with 1 or 2 people, and then it starts with your communities, and then it builds, right?
Yes.
And so I think that's what happened. I think we always encourage people to not just be Mav, but create Mav where you are. I always did, at least. I always I wanted to get people to understand, it's not me that makes it special. It's not Naomi. It's not Dante. It's not Chandler. It's you and your stories that make this so unique and so special. You are made in Imago Dei. You're created in the image of God. There's something that each of you carry that's so uniquely God and so uniquely yourself. And so I always encourage people that if you want to change the world, start with the people around you and start to really love and appreciate the people and their journeys, their stories, because people have such amazing stories of faith, but they're not famous, they're not
right
on platforms to share them. They're just living their life.
Yes, absolutely.
But it's those stories matter. And I think those stories are what encourages and influences people like myself, And so that's kind of what I would say. But InterVarsity, I think, really kind of set that stage for me to really see and appreciate diversity within the church and within the faith.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yes, I agree that, the idea of everyday faithfulness is extraordinary faithfulness, of places where it doesn't feel like you have some huge platform that, and even the people who do have this big platform, when they go home at night, they're still just normal everyday people with their other contacts. And it's well, what does it look like for you to have a world-changing impact in that context that's just right there around you? And so so one of the questions that I want to ask you then is kind of how this has changed for you, and so what that development has looked like. So I want us to travel back in time for just a moment, back to 2008, which is a ways back, and I want you to think about, you've just walked off the stage of Herrick's Idol. And you have sung Adonai by Avalon up in front of all of your peers and everything
so
here.
Wild.
And you say that was one of the most memorable experiences of your life. So you think back to those early days at Herrick's. You think about playing music with your family, that after big holiday gatherings of playing worship music together, posting grainy cell phone worship videos on YouTube and those kinds of things, to today today you are your wife, mother, some of these things that you shared with us, that you've had this very public stage as you've done music and worship and even more than that. What's changed and what's developed about your perspective of what it means to love and worship God as you've grown in both experience and maturity?
Wow, first of all, you set that up really nice, because that is a beautiful way of asking that question, because so much has actually changed. And I think more has changed since having my daughter. I actually feel like life, or my understanding of faith, has become a lot simpler. Just a lot simpler, and just a lot more, I don't know. I think now, if I were to say okay, what is one thing that I want to do, or my one goal when it comes to faith? I think my one goal is to just love Jesus well and keep him the main thing. And I think like, I grew up Pentecostal. So there was a lot of like rules, and just the way that you needed to do things it was
Okay.
a little legalistic at times. We didn't always understand like why we were doing certain things. So I felt like I kind of understood the Lord in one way, where it was just like, I don't want to disappoint him. I don't want to do something wrong. Like, I don't want to not go to heaven, Now I'm
Yeah.
just like, what if instead of this fear or obsession of going to heaven or hell, what if heaven is actually knowing the Lord, like knowing him well, knowing him rightly, knowing him. And I think that's just been my new thing now, like loving Jesus. And, it's not that, everything I do is going to be perfect. It's not, right? But it's this messy type of inquisitive faith that invites Jesus into every part. So I'm challenging myself to kind of think that way. And it's really honestly hard sometimes to unlearn the God who I thought he was, this person or this massive thing in the sky that's like, shaming me when I make a mistake, or, is a conditional type of God, a conditional kind of lover. It's taken a lot of work. I'm still honestly going through that process, if I'm being very frank, like just of unlearning that God and knowing him to be a friend and a father and someone who genuinely like wants to see me happy, but also like fulfilling what I'm called to do, And I think it took me having a child, and the way that I look at her is I feel the Lord really kind of redeeming a lot of like old things, just the way that I've processed how I receive love and how I give love. I just see him kind of doing that with me and teaching me what love really looks like, because I don't think it looked like anything I thought it was. So grace, mercy, love, all of it is kind of becoming a lot simpler, where it's just like, there's really nothing I can do to run away from that with him. And so he's been very patient with me. I'm like in my 30s, and I feel once again like I'm a little late, but I feel like better late than never in learning this, because I just know now that I have my daughter, like I never want her to grow up thinking that if this is how I feel as an earthly mother, I can't even imagine how God feels, but I never want her to grow up thinking that I'm never going to be there. Like I'm never going to stop. I don't want her to think I'm going to stop loving her for any reason.
Right.
Because I'll be disappointed. I'd be sad at certain things, but that doesn't mean I withhold my love or take my love away. I don't want to live like that. So if I'm like that, I can't even imagine how much more the Lord is like that with me. And so I think that's something that I'm learning more about faith and love and grace. Really, it's just grace. It's really understanding how scandalous grace really is.
Yeah, wow. I really love that image. Being a parent also, I can so identify with what you're talking about, of like the ways that I think about when I read my Bible. And I read the responses that Jesus has to people, or when God's talking to Moses, or whatever it might be, these conversations back and forth, how often I in my head, what I hear is this very like almost condemning sort of response that he gives of like, well, why don't you get this? Why aren't you getting this right? And I've had this thought of like, man, what if it's actually a very compassionate, like, oh, no, that's not that's not what I'm saying. That's not what I invited you to do. But that it is actually this like loving response that he gives, even if it is corrective. And thinking about, gosh, that is definitely how I want to be as a parent, and that's how I want my child to hear me. I want my daughters to hear me that way when I correct them or something, of like, oh, I love you, and I'm just inviting you into something better than what you were doing before. And yes, my love is not contingent on you getting this right. And Lord, please change me when that's not actually the case. But that I really love that. And so. MJ, I'd like to know, why does the world need that? Like, if this is what God has invited you into, this is the way that he's revealing himself to you, and he wants you to be a part of world change with him, then why is what he's teaching you right now, the things that you're experiencing, why does the world need it?
Because we're broken. We're in desperate need of that kind of love. And a love like this doesn't make sense. And I think that's where, I honestly think that's why a lot of people choose not to follow the Lord, because it almost sounds too good to be true. Like it almost sounds too good to be true that there's no way there's a God out there that's going to accept me for all of these things. And then when I fail, he's still going to accept, he'll still welcome you with open arms. Like there's no way. So I just think that the world is so broken. And John, like I have seen now having done music, I've just seen the way that like songs have impacted people and the stories like that they have just of hurt and brokenness that they're just in need of, they're just in need of like love, true love, like a love without conditions, and I just feel very strongly that once we experience that kind of thing, if we're saying God is love, when people experience love, it will change their lives. Like it's not something they can just ignore. It begs for your attention. It really does. And so it begs for your life, really. It begs for your change. It begs for your identity. It begs for who you are. And you can't really ever really be the same. That's why they say people who have encountered the love of Jesus know, and they just aren't the same. They can't really go back. They don't walk like they used to walk. They don't talk like they used to talk. It's just, it's a whole thing. It's a whole thing. And so once I think people understand that kind of love really comes from Jesus, like that kind of love comes from the Lord. Like, I think there's really no ceiling to what we can do through him. And I think that's that is why the world needs it, because it's just in desperate need of someone to be loving them, like someone, like they need to know and experience what love is, because once you've experienced it, it's just a chain reaction. Loved people love others well. And I think that's what we need. We just love to see that chain reaction kind of light the world on fire. And then we've got a whole world on fire for the Lord and who love the Lord and can just spread. It spreads. Like love is contagious. It spreads to the people around you, So yeah, that's kind of why I think it's necessary to have. I think it's needed in our world today, especially in our world today,
Yes, we live in a time where it feels like everything is so like split apart from each other. Like it's either this or that. There's no in between, and you either completely identify with us or you do not identify with us whatsoever. That's how you're in, that's how you're accepted. And as soon as you no longer do that, sorry, but you're out. Sorry, not sorry, actually.
Right.
And that feels like such a different place where Jesus, the one who actually knows what is true and right and good, stands in the middle and says, like, you don't have it figured out, I do. And that's why I'm the one that's in charge of making all of this happen and not you. So come with me, again, walk with me, this daily basis of walking with me and experiencing my love and transformation, and we'll be a part of making things different together in this world. And I love that simplicity, and that is absolutely, that's what the world around us needs so strongly.
Amen. I agree.
So MJ, this in my mind, this feels like slightly a sharp turn in the other direction or in a different direction, but I know that these things are related. And that's one of the other of many interesting facets of your life is that you have a background in clinical mental health practices, that you have a master's degree in clinical mental health counseling. And at least at one, I don't know if you still are today, but at least at one point you were a nationally certified therapist, that this was like a part of what you were doing. And you mentioned earlier in our conversation that you're not practicing currently, but that doesn't mean that this doesn't have an impact. My background is in clinical psychology. That's what my master's degree is in. And that plays a role in like everything that I do, even though I don't use the degree professionally. So, I mean, for you, how is it that your training and your education in mental health is helping in this partnership with God that you have?
Well, yeah, like I'm like you. I feel like it's a skill like I'm using every day. I'm like constantly, even just active listening, which is something we like practice to do and like train ourselves to do as therapists. I really try to do that in writing sessions. I'm like most of the time what my life
Interesting.
looks like is like a lot of writing sessions and a lot of like leading worship. Now, I don't necessarily like when you're leading worship, I don't find that the skills are coming out as much, but I think it's like in the interactions and the relationships you form, like with your team, or like how
Mm,
you even just like making people feel seen, asking for their name, like things like that. Like you'd be surprised, like how many people don't really engage with people that are working for them. And so I really want to try to like make people feel seen as much as possible. So I'm always like, hey, what's your name? Like doing this, like doing that. And I'm very like intentional about that. But I feel like that's a skill that I carried into, I carried from counseling into real life. And then active listening is another one where I'm in rooms and I feel like when we're getting down to the crux of what someone wants to say, like I have mastered the art of asking. I feel like I have. Anybody who's written with me,
sure.
hopefully they'll agree. But I feel like I've mastered the art of like asking the right question for the person to come out with the aha moment, because a lot of counseling is, you're not telling people what to do. You're walking alongside them and allowing them to see all the different perspectives so that they themselves can formulate a thought that is their own. And so I find myself kind of doing that a lot in rooms where I'm like, okay, like, what is it that you're going through? What is it that you want to communicate to the church? Or like, what is it that you want to communicate to your listener, whatever it is, like, and kind of partnering with them to get to the meat of that is my goal. So I love like conceptualizing when it comes to songwriting and stuff. And I find myself really called to be in those rooms to kind of get down to the heart of what people are saying. Because a lot of times the songs you're listening to and the songs you're leading worship to, God's already wrecked it for us. Like we've done the work. This is like now the song is like the testimony.
Yes.
Having gone through it. So it's
Right.
like we've been through it at that point, but it's like it's not behind us to know that like this is what people are going through right now and they need something to hold on to. And so I feel like God's kind of equipped me. I could not imagine doing music without having my counseling background. So I knew that was a very intentional move on God's part. Like he wanted me to kind of have all this background and then be in these rooms with people and meet people and be able to listen to them and see them and hear their stories and help them in whatever way that I can. I'm not practicing anymore, but I find myself asking honest questions and encouraging honest dialogue with people. And it feels very therapeutic for myself, but also for them, I would say. So I definitely feel like God's kind of intersected both worlds for me in the most beautiful way. And I could not have asked for it any other way. It's beautiful the way that it is.
That's really interesting, like even just the way that you're connecting the use of active listening skills, because I mean that's something, whether it's your audience or your coworker, your co-writer, the people that you're working with in this space, or if it's with God, like what does it look like to actively listen? And so often we think of prayer as like, oh, I'm saying the stuff that's on my mind to God, but like, what does it look like to harness the skill of active listening to just sit and be like, Lord, what do you want to say to me right now so that I can be a benefit to the people that you have sent me to, so that I can be a benefit in this world-changing work that we're doing together. And that is such an interesting connection of those ideas, and I really like that. MJ, as you look, we've talked about this a little bit. You've touched on this in a few different spots, but I'm just going to ask the question overtly now.
Yeah.
And that's you look back on your time with InterVarsity, what are some of the threads that connect you that connect those student days to today? What are some of the formative ways that God has been shaping you in preparation for the work that you've done and the work that you're doing today?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things is just seeing how important to God diversity is. Just the way that each person is created in his image, I feel like that is something I carried from my days in InterVarsity to now, where I've really learned to appreciate just the scope of the body of Christ and like the stories, the cultures, the faiths, like it's all really, really important to him. And they're all so uniquely different. And I've really appreciated that. I think that's like one of my biggest things. The second we actually did not talk about, but the way that InterVarsity encouraged me to look at scripture and study scripture. And I can't even remember, I still have a InterVarsity bookmark where they teach you the what is it, like I forgot what they called, like the little acronym that they had for
the
studying
OIA.
scripture. OIA, there you go. Observe, like interpret.
Observe, interpret, and apply. There it is. It's right there.
Right.
It's in there.
Okay.
It's in there.
It's so in there. Listen, like I really carried that into a lot of my life. Like that like the way that they would encourage us to like study scripture. I still remember I don't remember if it was Bus Lay or a big event, but Jason had printed out a passage and encouraged us all to like read it and then like highlight, underline. Like I carried that even into songwriting. And I would look at verses that were speaking to me, study them, kind of interpret them in my own way, observe the things that I need to observe, and then apply them and write. Like songwriting was part of that for me. And I feel like that thread I kind of like carried into my songwriting and into rooms with me, where I kind of encourage people to like, maybe not as like, I'm not like writing it out in sessions, but I'm encouraging people like, what do we observe in this? Like, how many times do you feel like this has been said, or how many, and then interpreting it in the rooms with each other. And then like, after that, like, how could we put this into song so that it encourages application for people? Like it encourages people to be challenged in their faith and their knowledge of this scripture. So I mean, that's another big formative way that I feel like God has used InterVarsity to kind of shape what I'm doing. And I'm sure there's so many ways. I mean, listening was a really big one, just the way that I built community and listening. And I think that's a really big thing that I carry into, the music industry in general, not even the Christian world, but like just in general, like I try my best to really love people well. And I think that, the way that InterVarsity would encourage us to kind of do that was a really, really beautiful thing for me. And then lastly, I felt that InterVarsity was my first exposure to real missional evangelistic things, like efforts, and it was, I think at that point, before being involved with InterVarsity, I had looked at like me going on a mission trip as missions. But I still remember like when I first approached Sophia, she was like, why do you want to create like an InterVarsity on your campus? I'm just curious. And so I was just like, I just don't see God there. And I want God to be there. He's not there. And I just feel like he's not moving. And she encouraged me, and she was just like, I actually encourage you to ask the Lord to open your eyes to see how he's moving on your campus, because he already is. You just don't know it. Yeah. And that, I still remember that. I was so like challenged by that, but it was, awesome. It was a way to like see God moving in our world. And it really pushed me to be more evangelistic in the way that I approached singing, or even my ministry. And so much of what we did with Mav, like, we went to arenas and we did things in arenas, but I always walked into it as a very missional thing. We walked into it to share with people the gospel, and that was what we did. And a lot of times you walk into cities and you can feel the heartbeat of a city. You can sense the spirit on a city, like the spirit of the Lord on a city. You can also sense the spirits of darkness on a city. So it's just like you're really dealing with warfare on a different level. And a lot of that warfare I learned about, like being a part of InterVarsity and just seeing the ways, just even starting the InterVarsity at York, and just the way that there was warfare in that. And there was like a lot of fight from the enemy, and just sensing that. I learned a lot about spiritual warfare and just how important evangelism, missional work, and spiritual warfare are all connected. And those are like 4 big takeaways, I would say, that I've gotten from IV and how I see it every day in my life today.
Wow, that's amazing. I love that. And all things that we can like continue using in such real ways today. The number of times that I've taken the OIA method in a non-Bible study space and been like, I am 100% using my manuscript abilities right here, and there's no scripture being used.
That's right.
And MJ, do you have a word of encouragement for other alumni like you who are partnering with or trying to figure out how to partner with God in his world-changing work right there in the context that he's put them in?
Yeah, you know what? I'm going to steal it from Sophia Gabriel because she did it to me.
All right, do it.
But I would say maybe, you look at your Ivy days and you're looking back on those days and being like, yeah, like that was a time where I was really involved in ministry. That was such a beautiful time. Like, I want to encourage you to not just look at that time as like past, but really engage in community around you today and ask the Lord to open your eyes to see what he's doing in your communities around you. Maybe it's like at work and you're not sure how you see the Lord using you at your workplace. I encourage you to ask the Lord to open your eyes, to give you opportunities. Like, we sometimes forget how accessible God is for us. Like, he is always there ready to answer the stupidest of things. So it's like, there's really nothing too small that you can ask that he won't like hear, And so even if it's like, hey, like I'm going into this grocery store and I really have this desire, God, to like share something, like, or maybe it's you've been through something and you just know that you've been through it to share it, and encourage someone else. Like, I'm going to this grocery store, give me an opportunity, Lord. Like, and keep yourself open to what God might show you and lead you to do. I remember that being part of the Transforming Prayer track was so integral to me as an InterVarsity student, because it really taught me to engage with the Lord on a very practical level and invite him into the things that maybe I didn't think were important enough, like me going to a grocery store. Like, I wouldn't have thought to ask God for an opportunity in that moment, but like, when I started to invite him into day-to-day stuff, I feel like that's when I really got to see him move in a really unique way. And it would be as small as like, okay, God, like, I desperately need a parking spot close to the store. Like, it's just, I'm carrying the baby. Like, it's just a lot, like just those small things, but he would come through and it would be amazing to it's just small actions like that really build relationship. We think about people day to day now. Like, sometimes when I'm on FaceTime with a friend, they're on FaceTime with me for hours. Like, like we're just kind of living life alongside each other. But that's like, I'm like calling God on FaceTime, being like, hey, like, I'm inviting you into my world. And so I encourage you, if you're that InterVarsity alum, like, invite the Lord into your day-to-day life in the most simple ways. You'd be surprised to see how he moves and what he's doing and how that would greatly encourage your faith. So that's what I would say. As Sophia says, ask the Lord to open your eyes to see what he's doing in the here and now. So that's what I would say for you.
That's great. And MJ, you've been incredibly generous with your time, hanging out, telling these stories, going back into the history of the student days and the way that all of this has been playing out for you now. Just really briefly, how can people stay connected with you and with the work that you're doing? I'm sure that you have things that are happening that you're excited about, things that and ways that people can like stay engaged. So please help us. How can we keep following the work that you're doing?
So hopefully in this new year, I'm hoping to do a few live shows in New York, but all of the info will be on either my website, MaryanneJGeorge.com, or you can follow me on Instagram, socials. I mean, everything is on the website. So if you wanted to look at the website, you can find all my socials on there. But I have new music coming out in the new year. So that's
Awesome.
something I'm very excited to release. It'll be my solo stuff, like solo artistry. But yeah, just
That's
be on the
exciting.
lookout on my website.
Very cool. Well, maybe right alongside of that, MJ, how can we be praying for you? How can the community of InterVarsity alumni, how can we pray for you in this season?
Yes, I would just pray for just that I would follow Jesus and where he goes, a lot of clarity on what my next steps are. I feel like I know what I'm meant to do. I think it's just the logistics of how to get there. And so just prayers for that, just the next step that I'm supposed to be taking, and that I would just continue to love him well. I think that's like a desire that I have that I'm really trying. And as I go through this journey of like reconstructing my faith and what it looks like in this very simple way, I would just ask for a lot of prayer and encouragement, and that the Lord would be present on that journey with me, which I already feel like he is, but just that I'm like following him, and not what other people might say, not the voices around me and the powers that be, but like just move forward following the Lord and being really intentional by doing that. So yeah, that would be my prayer. Thanks.
Of course. Absolutely. MJ, thank you so much for your time. This has been so fun to get to talk to you, and blessings in the next season and in all the hard work that's going into putting out some new music and raising a family. And blessings as you do that. Thank you. Thank you for being an InterVarsity alum. We love our alumni.
Thank you. I'm so grateful for InterVarsity and the ways that it's changed my life.
Thanks for tuning in, alumni. Check the show notes for more information about today's guest and for ways that you can be praying for your fellow alum. If you know someone who needs to hear this story, take just a moment to share the episode with them, and then be sure to leave us a rating and a review as well. Now go change that world, alumni. Thanks for listening to InterVarsity World Changers. This podcast is brought to you by the InterVarsity Alumni Relations Team, hosted and produced by John Steele, production assistance by Mike Santera, and our theme song is Crazy by InterVarsity alumnus Andy Minio.